The centrifuge was still humming when I walked into the lab that morning, long before anyone else usually arrived. I remember the smell first, ethanol and something sweeter, almost like citrus, hanging in the air thicker than it should have been. It hit me the same moment I noticed the assay plate on the bench, half-loaded, droplets already drying in their wells. My assay, my patented chemistry, except I hadn't run anything in this room last night. No one had. At least, no one who was supposed to be here. The HVAC kicked on with that low, rattling sigh I'd learned to ignore over the years, but my attention was locked on the plate's timestamp. A small thermal label printer, one we didn't keep stocked at the main facility, had spat out a thin strip marked with a time I knew damn well none of my team had access to the building. Not officially, anyway. I felt my breath catch, more irritation than fear at first, until I saw the next thing. A discarded glove lying beside a microtube rack, the kind we discontinued months ago after switching vendors. Someone had gone out of their way to use old supplies. Someone who didn't want this run traced. I moved closer, fingertips hovering just above the bench surface without touching it. The wells still glistened. No visible contamination. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Too well. My stomach dropped as a realization I didn't want a name pressed in on me. I reached for the workstation, waking the monitor with a tap. The login screen flashed, demanding credentials, but not the ones tied to my team. The prompt belonged to a ghost account, one I deactivated months ago, or thought I had. My jaw clenched. For a second my vision edged white, as if the fluorescence overhead had sharpened into a blade. I typed in my override. The system hesitated before unlocking, almost like it resented me. And then the folder tree opened, revealing a series of runs labeled under a codename I recognized. One my co-founders and I used years ago when we were still naive enough to think inside jokes belonged in IP-sensitive environments. At the bottom of the list sat a set of assay readouts, exported, zipped, and marked as review-ready. The format wasn't ours. It matched the submission templates used by a diagnostics competitor we'd met with at a conference last quarter. The same competitor my co-founders insisted wasn't worth pursuing as a partner. My chest tightened in a slow squeeze as my thumb hovered over the trackpad. I clicked open the most recent data file. The curves, the thresholds, the amplification behavior. It wasn't just similar to my work, it was my work. My signature algorithmic fingerprint. The thing I'd spent 7 years refining, and someone had formatted it to look like theirs. A cold, metallic tang crept over my tongue. Part fear, part rage, part something I didn't yet have language for. I froze when I saw the final detail, an auto-export log. The file had been transmitted just hours earlier from this same machine to a private server address not registered to our company. That was when I knew Marcus and Daniel hadn't just undermined me. They debuilt another lab. I didn't tell anyone where I was going when I left the main lab and crossed the courtyard toward the administrative wing. The sun had barely pushed itself over the parking structure, casting everything in that washed-out silver that makes glass look colder than it is. My footsteps echoed in the hallway, too loud, too exposed, until I slipped into my office and shut the door softly behind me. For a moment I just stood there, palms pressed against the edge of my desk, staring at the framed patent application on the wall. The same one Marcus said we should update for optics last quarter. The memory tasted bitter. I inhaled slowly, feeling that faint tang of hand sanitizer lingering from the dispenser near the door, grounding myself before the flashback pulled me in fully. I met Marcus and Daniel 6 years ago, 2 clean-cut men in tailored blazers at a crowded conference in Chicago. I remember the first thing Marcus said to me as we waited in line for burnt coffee and stale pastries. "You're Dr. Caldwell, right?" His smile had an ease that felt intentional. "Your fluorescence suppression method, brilliant, truly elegant." I laughed, brushing a stray curl behind my ear. Elegant is not how I describe the process of developing it. Daniel nodded eagerly. "Still, you cracked something the rest of us have been wrangling for a decade." I should have noticed it then, the way Marcus held eye contact just a little too long, or how Daniel kept steering the conversation toward funding. My funding. before we'd even exchanged last names. But I'd been exhausted and proud and hungry for partners who understood what I was building. We sat at a table near the windows, sunlight harsh on the cheap plastic chairs. Marcus laid out his credentials with the precision of a man who'd practiced. 15 years in assay optimization, 2 successful exits, and, he added with a soft chuckle, a deep appreciation for founders who know how to innovate. I remember my own response, calculated, cautious. I'm not looking for people to ride on my innovation. I'm looking for people who can expand it. Daniel leaned forward, suit jacket pulling tight across his shoulders. That's exactly why we came over. You need scale. We have scale. You need operations. We have operations. Then Marcus said the line I didn't realize I'd regret later. Trust me, Dr. Caldwell. With us, you'll never have to fight alone. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. A small warning sign flickered that first evening, Marcus insisting we skip the NDA because legal slows momentum. Daniel pushing to see raw data before we'd even agreed to a second meeting. I ignored it, chalked it up to enthusiasm, told myself men in this field were blunt, not predatory. Months later, we were co-founders. I'd handed them access to everything that mattered. Back in my office, staring at that patent on the wall, a dull ache bloomed at the base of my skull. I swallowed hard, replaying that first conversation as the truth settled like lead in my gut. I trusted them. That was my first mistake. The week after that morning in the lab moved strangely, everything too bright, too loud, like the world had been turned up half a notch without permission. Even the break room smelled sharper, burnt coffee mixing with microwaved leftovers that clung to the air. I kept moving through the halls with a practiced calm, nodding to researchers, answering quick questions, pretending nothing had shifted inside me. But everything had. We'd been celebrating growth only months earlier. Our diagnostic platform had just secured a $780,000 pilot expansion with a regional hospital network, and we were finalizing data for a partnership that could elevate our valuation past what our early investors ever projected. The company had momentum. We had momentum. And if I thought back, really thought about it, I could see the early misalignments. Subtle at the time, now glaring. There was the investor meeting last spring where Marcus confidently presented an updated assay performance slide with thresholds I hadn't approved. I'd pulled him aside afterward, arms crossed tightly against my chest. These aren't validated numbers, I whispered, keeping my irritation buried behind a thin smile. He gave that practiced shrug. Close enough, investors don't need raw truth, they need direction. I blinked. They need accuracy. Relax, he murmured, leaning one shoulder against the hallway wall. You're getting stressed over decimals. Big picture thinking, remember. Daniel joined us mid-sentence, waving his phone. Loved your section, Maya. Investors always perk up when you talk science. You should let Marcus handle the projections, though. You know how emotional you get about error margins. My jaw tightened. Emotional, I repeated quietly. He nodded with the confidence of a man who'd never been corrected. Yeah, it's not a bad thing, just means you care. But it can read intense. I felt my stomach flicker with heat. My intensity built this company. Marcus patted my shoulder in that patronizing, too familiar way. No one's questioning that. But for optics, let us manage some of the narrative. You focus on the brilliance. We'll handle the framing. I should have pushed harder. Instead, I let their words settle like sediment, irritating but ignorable. I told myself to choose my battles. I told myself alignment would follow success. Then came the purchase orders I didn't recognize. Small at first, unfamiliar reagent batches, strange quantities, equipment that didn't match our protocols. When I confronted Daniel during a budget sync, he smiled like I'd asked why the sky was blue. Oh, that, just exploratory work. You know how R&D is messy. Messy isn't the same as undocumented, I said. See, he laughed softly. Distracting yourself with minutiae again. Let it go. Each moment had felt like a pebble dropping into a pond, ripples, but nothing catastrophic. Now, with that off-books lab heavy in my mind, I realized they'd been paving this path for years, guiding me out of financial oversight, diluting my authority, reframing my leadership as volatility. Pieces clicking into place one by one, forming something ugly. I sat alone in my office late one evening, the building eerily quiet except for a distant printer warming up and shutting down again. The glow from my monitor washed the room in a cold blue as I scrolled through old budget reports, cross-referencing timestamps, approvals, signatures. Every inconsistency felt like a fingerprint. Every buried expense, a confession. And yet, the worst part wasn't the deception itself. It was how much of it I'd talked myself out of seeing. But I wasn't overthinking now. I wasn't imagining shadows. There was a pattern, a deliberate one. Hours after everyone left for the night, I was still at my desk, the glow from my monitor the only light in the room. The building had settled into that deep, humming quiet, ventilation whispering through the ceiling, the occasional metallic tick from the pipes expanding and cooling. I'd stopped feeling tired. My body had slipped into that cold, electric state that comes right before something breaks. I opened the secure directory where all assay data was supposed to be stored and started cross-referencing logs with the off-books files I'd found earlier. At first it was subtle. Run IDs that didn't match our established protocol structure, timestamps sliding into gaps where no one had scheduled work. Then deeper anomalies surfaced, metadata inconsistencies, machine signatures from devices we hadn't owned in over a year, file origins traced to subdirectories that shouldn't exist. Whoever had done this had tried to be clever, but not clever enough. I pulled up the export history from the workstation in the shadow lab. The machine ID had been renamed, lazy, almost insulting, but the underlying device signature was unmistakable, one we'd retired 2 years earlier when we upgraded our detection hardware. I felt a bitter laugh slip into my throat. They thought I wouldn't notice something that obvious. My fingers shook slightly as I drilled into the script logs, a string of automated tasks triggered by a user with elevated permissions. Permissions only founders possessed. And then I saw it, a pattern of folder transfers routed to a private server address. Not ours, not any of our partners. A server belonging to a diagnostics company we'd once considered licensing with, before Marcus argued they weren't strategic enough and shut the conversation down. I leaned closer as the file opened, and there it was, a full assay pipeline, a copy of my patented workflow wrapped inside a template identical to that competitor's review package. Every amplification curve, every calibration graph, every line of statistical analysis. Mine, rewritten to look like it wasn't mine at all. My vision went pale at the edges, and I swallowed against a sudden dryness in my throat. I clicked the email archive next. It took a minute for the search to complete, but when it did, a thread surfaced, buried but not enough. An exchange between Daniel and an executive at that same competitor. The subject line read simply, "Preliminary results." The body was a single sentence. "Consider this a preview. She won't see it coming." My chest seized, a slow constriction that made it hard to breathe. The air in the office tasted strange, like stale filter coffee and betrayal. I scanned the next message. More attachments, more data, more proof. Then a PDF. A proposal, my proposal, reformatted under their names. A signature block waiting for final approval. I pressed both hands to my temples, trying to slow the dizziness. Heat crawled up my neck. I forced myself to scroll further, even though a part of me already knew what I'd find. At the bottom of the thread, time-stamped late last night, was the line that made my heart go still. "Once we transition the final dataset, we'll move ahead without her." Not around me, without me. This wasn't miscommunication. It wasn't an oversight. It was a coordinated extraction. I sat back, air leaving my lungs in a thin, trembling exhale, and stared at the screen as the full scope settled over me. They were stealing my company, my science, and my future in plain sight. I didn't sleep that night. I don't think I even moved from my desk except to pour stale coffee into a mug that still smelled faintly of bleach from the dishwasher. By the time the sky outside my office window shifted from black to washed-out gray, My body felt hollow, like I'd been scraped clean from the inside. My hands trembled so badly at one point, I had to press them flat against the desk just to steady them. I kept replaying that last email, "We'll move ahead without her," until the words carved themselves into my skull. Around mid-morning, I finally forced myself to call outside counsel. Her voice came through the speakerphone, calm and clinical, the kind of voice that usually steadied me. "Not today." "Walk me through what you have," she said. I swallowed hard. I found an unauthorized workstation. Unapproved assay runs using my patented protocol. Export logs to an off-site server. Emails between my co-founders and a competitor. A full proposal with my data formatted as theirs. And... "Slow down," she interrupted gently. "What you're describing is serious, but seriousness and provability are two different things. Do you have irrefutable metadata, signatures, device trails?" "Some," I said, rubbing my temples. "Enough to map a pattern." "Pattern isn't proof," she replied. "And if you confront them too early, they'll scrub everything. You're dealing with co-founders who already think they can get rid of you. They won't hesitate to erase anything that leads back to them." My throat tightened. So what do I do? For now, nothing public, nothing reactive, and absolutely no direct accusations. Continue collecting evidence. Quietly. If you make one wrong move, they'll paint you as unstable, emotional, difficult. They'll weaponize every stereotype you already fight twice as hard to escape. The word emotional landed like a slap. I closed my eyes. "Maya," she said, softer now, "I'm not telling you to stay silent. I'm telling you to be careful." I ended the call more shaken than before. Not because she was wrong, she wasn't, but because I'd hoped for rescue, some lifeline, anything other than "you're on your own for now." Then came the board call. I hadn't planned to speak to them yet, but one of the investor reps reached out about organizational clarity. Voice dipped in that patronizing politeness people use right before they make a power grab. "I'm concerned you may be misinterpreting things," he said after I hinted, carefully, at irregularities. "Daniel and Marcus have been extremely proactive. Are you sure this isn't stress talking?" I inhaled sharply. "I'm sure." A pause. Let's wait for more information before making assumptions. More information. Assumptions. All of it code for sit down, don't make noise, don't disrupt the men. By the time I hung up, a throbbing ache had settled behind my eyes. I pressed my palms against them until I saw sparks. I felt small and furious and desperately alone. My sister called that evening. I ignored it. Then she called again. I finally answered, voice thin. "You sound awful," she said immediately. "When's the last time you ate?" My gaze drifted to the untouched lunch on my desk. "I'm fine." "You're lying," she said. "Talk to me." But I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I knew how deep this betrayal went. After the call, after the silence, after the ache, one truth crystallized with brutal clarity. No one was coming to save me. I'd have to tear this open myself. It was after midnight when the clarity finally hit me. Not a burst, not a revelation, just a quiet, decisive click inside my chest. The kind that arrives when there's nothing left to break. I'd been pacing my living room for nearly an hour, the soft scratch of my socks against the hardwood the only sound. My laptop sat open on the coffee table, its light casting long shadows across the room. I stopped mid-step, staring at the evidence folder I'd compiled. Dozens of files, hundreds of clues. Not enough strength to face them alone. One name surfaced in my mind before I could stop it. Renee. We de-worked together in the early days, back when the company operated out of a cramped shared lab, and we survived on vending machine snacks and adrenaline. She de-moved on 2 years ago to a forensics consultancy, the kind that cleaned up biotech messes no one talked about publicly. We hadn't spoken in months, not because of distance, but because I'd been too focused, too trusting of the wrong people to keep her close. I sank onto the sofa, grabbed my phone, and typed the message before I could talk myself out of it. "I need a friend, not official, you available tonight?" My finger hovered over send, then I hit it. The reply came 30 seconds later. "Bring coffee, this sounds like a long one." I exhaled for the first time all day. By the time I reached her apartment, the city felt suspended, traffic muted, streetlights buzzing faintly overhead, air still carrying the warmth of the day trapped between buildings. Renee opened the door before I knocked. She stood barefoot in sweats and an oversized hoodie, curls pulled into a messy bun, eyes sharp the moment they landed on me. "Who fucked you over?" she asked, stepping aside so I could enter. I managed a weak laugh. "You don't ease into things, do you?" "You called me after midnight," she said. "I'm skipping the warm-up." Her living room smelled faintly of bergamot and warm electronics from a laptop running on the coffee table. I set my bag down and handed her the drink. She took it, then nodded toward the couch. "Start from the top." I sat, hands clasped tightly between my knees. "I found an off-books lab." Her eyes widened slightly. "Go on." "They used my assay, my patented chemistry, ran tests after hours, exported data to a competitor." She didn't blink. "Who?" I hesitated. Saying their names out loud felt like betrayal layered on betrayal. "Marcus and Daniel." She let out a low whistle. "Damn." I opened my laptop and pulled up the evidence. She scooted closer, elbows on her knees, studying the screen with laser focus. The glow reflected in her eyes as she navigated through logs, metadata trails, export signatures. After a long silence, she said, "This isn't sloppy, it's orchestrated." "I know." She clicked deeper. "They left traces, though, enough to build a timeline, enough to show intent." My breath hitched. "Can we prove it?" She gave me a long look, steady, grounding. "We can, but you need to understand something before we start." "What?" "This won't be quick, and it won't be clean. We have to do it right." Her voice softened then, just slightly. "Are you ready for that?" I looked down at my shaking hands, then back at the quiet fury in her eyes. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." Her mouth curved into something sharp. "Good, then let's get to work." The next 2 weeks stretched into something that felt both endless and razor-sharp. By day, I pretended everything was fine, walking the halls with steady steps, answering team questions, sweating through meetings where Marcus sat 2 chairs over, spinning half-truths with that smooth, easy tone that used to make me trust him. By night, Renee and I built a trap piece by piece. Some mornings I'd catch my reflection in the glass doors as I entered the building, eyes slightly swollen, jaw clenched tight enough to ache, and I'd force my shoulders back before anyone noticed. The smell of overbrewed coffee in the lobby made my stomach turn some days. Other days it grounded me. But every day, without fail, I greeted Marcus with a polite nod, a tight smile, and a calm I didn't feel. "Morning, Maya," he'd say, voice warm, eyes calculating. "Morning," I'd reply, my pulse threading fast beneath my skin. Inside, I was a live wire. Back in our covert workspace, Renee's apartment or sometimes my office after hours, we mapped everything. Export logs, Shadow Lab schedules, metadata trails that lined up too neatly. We reconstructed the pipeline they'd built outside of our infrastructure, and every time we uncovered another link, another transfer, another whisper of collusion, the pit in my stomach deepened. One night, hunched over her coffee table covered in printouts, Renee let out a dry laugh. They really thought they could cover their tracks with these baby-level obfuscation attempts. I shook my head. "Arrogance." She nodded, and they underestimated the wrong person. Her certainty steadied me more than she knew. Midweek, I found something that made my breath stutter, a buried email thread Marcus and Daniel had exchanged with someone at the competitor company. This one was different, less cautious, more contemptuous. Daniel had written, "She's too distracted to notice. She's emotional. Will guide the narrative." My jaw tightened so hard it hurt. Distracted. Emotional. The same coded language they'd used in front of the board, in meetings, whispered behind my back with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Renee read the line over my shoulder. "They're building a psychological profile to discredit you. They've been doing it for years." She touched my arm lightly. "Then let's give them something they can't rewrite." We built a timeline, every unauthorized run, every exported data set, every machine footprint, every communication they thought they'd buried. Renee helped me pull in corporation records tied to that shadow lab, a shell entity registered quietly in a neighboring state. The directors listed, Marcus and Daniel. No attempt even at subtlety. We drafted a regulatory strategy, quietly, carefully. HIPAA implications for transferring patient-derived data without internal review. Patent violations. Breach of duty clauses embedded in our co-founder agreements. SEC disclosure failures tied to misrepresented proprietary assets. Renee walked me through each one, her voice steady even as my pulse thudded in my ears. A few times, when exhaustion blurred the screen, doubt crept in. What if this blows back on me? I whispered one night, staring at a folder of proof so thick it felt unreal. Maya, she said, lifting her gaze to mine. They're already trying to erase you. You exposing them isn't escalation, it's survival. I swallowed hard. It still feels like revenge. Revenge is acting without truth, she said. This is truth with receipts. By the end of the second week, the trap was ready. The evidence airtight, the strategy locked. I texted her 2 words. Tomorrow morning. She replied almost instantly. Recording ready. I stared at the message, adrenaline pulsing like heat beneath my skin. Tomorrow. It would all break tomorrow. I barely slept the night before. My body kept jolting awake, my heart thudding like I'd been running. By the time dawn finally broke, I felt carved from glass, transparent, brittle, sharp at the edges. The air outside had that early morning coolness that smells faintly metallic, like concrete just beginning to warm. I let it hit my face for a full minute before walking inside. The office lights flickered on with a soft hum as I entered. My palms felt damp against the smooth aluminum of the folder I carried, one containing only the first layer of evidence. The rest, Renee had. She'd arrive exactly when needed. Marcus strolled in right on time, wearing that same navy blazer he saved for bored days, carrying a travel mug that smelled like cinnamon and arrogance. He didn't even glance my way at first. Morning, Maya, he said breezy, practiced. Marcus, my voice didn't shake, that surprised me. He paused, finally noticing the tension in the air. Everything all right. Come to my office, I said. We need to talk. Something flickered across his face. Irritation, maybe, but he followed. The moment the door shut behind him, the room felt too small, too bright. The faint scent of printer toner drifted in from the copy room next door, grounding me just enough to keep breathing. What's going on? He asked, settling into the chair opposite mine like he had all the time in the world. I placed the folder between us. I found something strange in the logs. I'd like you to walk me through it. His brows lifted. Sure, what am I looking at? I slid out the first printed log. This machine ID, it was retired 2 years ago. He didn't flinch. We keep backups, legacy assets, you know how these systems are. They aren't connected to our network. A small pause. Maybe someone mis-tagged it. I reached for the second sheet. Then explained the export to an external server, one not registered to our infrastructure. His smile tightened. You know how analysts are, always testing pipelines. Sometimes they spin up sandbox environments. No analyst has these permissions. He exhaled, leaning back casually. Maya, you're interpreting things out of context. You've been under a lot of pressure lately. It's understandable to. Stop. My voice came out softer than I expected. Show me the context then. He glanced at the page again, irritation slipping through. Okay, he said carefully. I can explain. Go ahead. This was disaster prep, he said. We were stress testing alternate pathways, purely precautionary. With my patented chemistry, I asked. Run after hours, unlogged, hidden under a ghost account. His jaw twitched. You're being emotional about this. There it was, the trigger, the weapon. I kept my expression neutral. Is that your explanation? For now, he said, until we can all sit down and sort through this properly. I don't know why you're escalating something so minor. Minor, I repeated. sliding the next document toward him, an email printout. His eyes skimmed the page. I saw the moment his face paled. "That's out of context," he said quickly. "Which context?" I asked softly. "Makes she's too distracted to notice sound better." He swallowed. I leaned forward slightly. "Marcus, I'm giving you one chance. Tell me the truth." "I am," he insisted, but his voice cracked around the edges. "You're misreading everything. This is why Daniel and I—" "This," I interrupted, "is why what?" He hesitated, just a breath, but enough. I slid the final sheet toward him, the proposal formatted using my data, under his name. His voice dropped. "You set me up." "No," I said steady. "You set yourself up, I just documented it." That was when the door opened. Renee stepped inside, calm, composed, her phone out, not hidden, not subtle. "Just to be clear," she said, her tone razor smooth, "this conversation is being recorded. And before you worry about legality, I announced my presence. If you continue speaking, you're consenting." Marcus's head snapped toward her. "You can't do this." "You already did," she said. He looked at me then, truly looked, panic flickering behind his eyes for the first time. I didn't look away. "Your access is suspended," I said quietly. "Effective immediately." His phone buzzed, then again, one revoked access notification after another. Marcus's face collapsed, not dramatically, not loudly, but with the slow, devastating realization of a man who has finally understood he's lost. The fallout started before Marcus even made it to the parking lot. Security walked him out quietly, no handcuffs, no shouting, just two firm escorts and a stunned silence thick enough to bend the air. I watched from my office window, fingers gripping the edge of the sill, the faint scent of lemon floor cleaner still lingering from the night crew. His posture had changed, shoulders drawn in, steps stiff, as if each movement confirmed a truth he wasn't ready to accept. I didn't feel triumphant, just emptied. Within minutes, I convened an emergency board meeting. Half of them appeared on screen, faces backlit by home offices and dim studies. The chair, a woman who'd always been polite but distant, adjusted her glasses and said, "Maya, the email you sent said urgent misconduct." "Explain." I didn't rush. I opened the packet, this time the full packet, and laid the evidence out methodically. Unauthorized lab runs, shadow exports, metadata trails, proposal drafts with my patent data rebranded as theirs, incorporation documents linking Marcus and Daniel to an unregistered facility. The board chair leaned forward. "Are you absolutely certain this is their work?" Renee, sitting beside me, spoke with easy authority. "The device signatures match. The export pathways are irrefutable. The timeline is airtight. They built a parallel lab." She tapped the table lightly. "And they used her science to do it." One of the investor reps muttered, "Unbelievable." But not because he doubted me, because they had finally been forced to see what I'd been trying to say for months. I scrolled to the email thread, the one where Daniel wrote I was too distracted to notice. The silence that followed was a different kind of heavy. The board chair's voice sharpened. "We need to vote." It wasn't unanimous at first. One member hesitated, worrying out loud about investor perception, the timing, the contract pipeline, the market response. Then I pulled up one more piece of evidence, a draft agreement between my co-founders and the competitor dated weeks before. That ended the hesitation. "Effective immediately," the chair said. "Marcus and Daniel are removed from all leadership roles, stripped of access, and referred to regulatory authorities for investigation." A pressure I didn't realize I'd been holding released all at once, leaving me lightheaded. After the meeting, Renee and I filed the necessary notifications, HIPAA breach concerns, patent violation alerts, SEC disclosures. Each submission carried its own weight, each one a reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything. Later that week, the competitor issued a carefully worded public statement claiming they had declined to pursue discussions with unauthorized representatives. A transparent attempt to distance themselves. The industry understood exactly what it meant. The consequences for Marcus were immediate. His LinkedIn went silent, then blank, then locked. The Whisper network in Biotech started doing what it always does, spreading truth faster than official channels ever could. Talent partners withdrew offers. Consulting gigs evaporated. One of his supposed allies at the competitor cut ties publicly, likely to save his own skin. Daniel fared no better. His shell entity was dissolved within days. Rumors circulated about legal negotiations, though none of it surprised me. It was over. But the exhaustion that settled into my bones afterward was unlike anything I'd ever felt. Relief and grief braided together. Because yes, I'd won, but this victory had carved something out of me. For the first time in weeks, I let myself sit back, breathe, and feel the full, trembling truth. Justice had been served. But the cost was still unraveling. For 8 months, everything felt like reconstruction, slow, deliberate, exhausting work. Some days I woke before sunrise, heart pounding, convinced there was still something buried in the system I'd missed. Other days I moved through the lab like a ghost, double-checking every access log, every assay submission, every innocuous Slack message. Trauma doesn't clock out just because the danger does. The legal process took its toll. My attorneys prepped me for depositions that stretched long enough to blur the hours. In one session, I sat across from Marcus for the first time since the confrontation. He couldn't meet my eyes. His lawyer kept objecting, but Renee's forensic reconstruction left little room to maneuver. Every timestamp, every device ID, every data trail mapped exactly where it needed to. At hour 4, when his counsel asked whether he had acted maliciously to remove Dr. Caldwell from decision-making, he hesitated, 10 seconds of silence that felt like a lifetime. Then he muttered, "I acted in the company's best interest." No one in the room believed it, especially not him. Keeping the company alive became its own battle. I spent weeks calling clients personally. The hardest was the Kaiser lead researcher, a woman who had always trusted our platform. "We heard there were internal issues," she said cautiously. "We resolved them," I replied. "And I want you to know your data was never compromised. I've implemented safeguards to make sure nothing like this can happen again." A beat of silence. Then, "Good, he always seemed too smooth. Send me the new protocol documents." I hung up with my hands shaking, not from fear this time, but from relief. Investors eventually returned, some cautiously, others with contrite messages about misjudgments and miscommunications. One Bakken apologized outright, which shocked me more than anything. By quarter's end, we closed a $10.4 million Series B. I hired a new head of operations, a woman with a spine of steel and a resume that intimidated half the board. I promoted 2 junior researchers whose integrity had never faltered. We rebuilt, not perfectly, but honestly. And still some nights, I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, breath-catching, convinced someone was running assays in a room I hadn't discovered yet. I'd sit there in the dark, letting the fear move through me until it thinned into something tolerable. Healing isn't linear. Leadership isn't armor. And betrayal, real betrayal, leaves fingerprints long after the perpetrators are gone. As for Marcus and Daniel, the industry did what the industry does. Their reputations splintered quietly but decisively. Last I heard, Marcus was doing contract work for a mid-tier lab in another state, nothing near leadership, no equity, no influence. Daniel disappeared into consulting purgatory, the kind where no one is quite sure what you do, and no one cares enough to ask. Sometimes people ask me if I feel vindicated, if the justice was enough. I never know how to answer. Because the truth is, victory and loss lived side by side for a long time. But then there are moments, small, steady ones, when I see my team smiling in the lab, or feel the hum of new equipment we purchased outright, or watch our platform catch an anomaly in real time that could save someone's life. And in those moments, I remember why I fought as hard as I did. Why I couldn't let them erase me.